Hey everyone, and welcome back to Watercolor 101, where I'm taking you through how I watercolor. So in this episode, we're going to learn how to draw kind of a really cool forest scene. And so it's going to use a lot of gradients. It's going to use some wet on wet, some dry on dry, all that stuff. It's going to put all the techniques we've been talking about together. Now I have a video that I did previously that's not technically part of the Watercolor 101. I did it before I decided to do a whole series on watercoloring. So I'm going to put it in the Watercolor 101 playlist, but it just doesn't say Watercolor 101 part whatever. But it talks about doing gradients, and I thought about redoing it just for this, but I thought, well, there's something really new that I could teach with it. So I'll put a link to that video in the description. You can go ahead and watch that video and check that out if you need a little bit more explanation on how to do a gradient. So my art table is set up a little bit differently. I have a really tough clipboard right here, and I have a piece of actual watercolor paper. We're going to be putting a lot of water on this paper, so we definitely want to use watercolor paper for this. And I'm also going to do a technique which I tape the paper down. This is going to help the paper not to buckle and allow it to dry completely before I remove the tape. That way I'll keep it from being all warped and everything. So this is the method I use, and it's easy and relatively inexpensive. So all you need is some sort of board that can totally get wet without warping. So I'm using this clipboard. And you're going to need some masking tape. You can also use painter's blue tape. I have used that before and it's okay. So you're going to take a piece, and what I generally do is run my finger across it just a couple of times, and the oils from my fingers will take away the sticky enough so it's not going to totally tear my paper up when I take it off. And then you're just going to place it in or over your paper, the edge of your paper, and you want to make sure it's kind of even. So you'll see the distance between here and here. I'm going to try to keep that same distance because you want a nice straight line. And then you're going to place that down and keep the tape as tight as possible. And you're going to do that technique across all four sides. Once you have the tape on all four sides, you just kind of want to run your finger and push that down so it's nice and sealed. And your tape and paper are ready to go. So this is the painting that I did a while ago, and I really like this one. It was really fun, but has a really nice ending result. So we're going to attempt this similar painting together today. So what I'm going to do is I have just a recyclable dish. I think this had baby food in it, but it's nice and shallow, and I'm actually going to put some water in here. I have a jar for rinsing my brushes in, but I want to keep my wash water separate so that it doesn't get all dirty. So I'm going to put some water in that. Okay, and with that we're going to wet down the paper. So I'm going to take a nice large brush, and I'm just going to wet the paper down because I'm going to want these washes to go over the whole thing. So nice and wet across the whole paper, not missing anything. So it's nice and wet. You can't really see it on camera. I can tip this maybe a little bit. So it's not drippy wet, but it's a fuzzy wet. So now I'm going to take my lightest color, which I'm actually going to take a yellow. And even still with this big brush, and I'm just going to apply that yellow to the center of my paper. Very, very light yellow. Make it a little darker towards the edges. Push that back just a little bit. I'm going to be putting a lot of paint and a lot of water on this paper, but just in case some of this shows through, I want a nice bright sky in the background. The technique I'm looking for is, have you ever looked at a forest that's really dark but you can see the light shining through in the back? That's what I'm wanting to get in this effect here. Wash water up there so I don't knock it over onto my art desk, which I've done several times. So it's not super important that you make it totally smooth. You want a little bit of variety in there. Now comes the part where you're just going to be building that color up. So I'm going to just keep on grabbing in these darker yellows and putting those towards the edges, but I want this to remain really, really white. A light yellow. Now, even though we have taped this down, you're going to start noticing the paper's going to be buckling up a little bit, and it will, when it dries, it will flatten out again. Okay, so once this is done, I'm going to actually take my paintbrush and I'm going to clean this big paintbrush off because I won't need this one anymore. So I'm going to switch to this one. It's a 12 flat round, and I'm going to start adding in my greens. And again, I'm going to start off with my lightest shades first. I'm going to get this green going. So I'm using this kind of sap green. I'll try to remember to show you the colors that I use. So for the yellows, I used these two colors here. So right now I'm using this one, and then I'll go down the line and start using these ones later. So now I'm not going to do a wash, I'm going to do a blot. I'm just going to start blotting in my color because I want the sun to poke through. So I'm just going to dabble this color on. And I'm going to make this slight vignette right here in the center. And you're going to use a lot of water. You want this to spread. You want it to fade. You want it to bleed into everything. And you have to work a little fast. You can't let this paper totally dry on you or you're going to lose this technique. And then you'll have to re-wet the paper and all that good stuff. And if you need to re-wet it, just rinse your brush off and then just dab in a little bit more water. But you want to try to avoid having to do that. Now you don't want this to just turn into a green. See how I have this just really textured? You want that texture. You want to look like there's, you know, leaves and stuff going in the background. We're not going to see a lot of this. We're going to be layering over top of this, but this is just laying in the foundation. Okay, you don't have to worry about down here. Down here's the ground, so we're going to be putting some other things there. But you can bring it down in here to the ground if you want. Okay, as you get this layer on, you're going to start in with a next darkest color. So I'm going to go over one. So now I'm going to go over to this one here, which is a little bit darker. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to dab in those colors. And I don't want to totally cover up the first bunch of green or yellow, so I'm a little bit sparser. And you'll notice I'm changing the direction of my brush. I'm not just going doot, 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 doot. I'm changing the direction because it's kind of like a stamp. It'll stamp that same shape and I don't want it to look conformed. So I'll even roll my brush. I'll roll it so it's flat like this, and then I'll roll it so the width is out. I want to keep this different so that's not looking. And if you find that you're getting that stamped look, add more water so that your paints can flow and cover stuff up. The trick with watercolor painting is just that, you're painting with water. So don't get stuck in the mindset that with this technique that you're painting with paint and you have to have a really thick concentrate of paint. You're getting your water and you're flowing your water across there. But you don't want it to be so soupy that everything just bleeds in together and you lose your texture. So it's this dance, it's this balance that you find. And that's really where playing with this comes in, where you just want to find that delicate balance of how much water to how much paint to get that technique that I want. Now you'll see I'm starting to bring in just really fine little sprigs into my sunspot, and that'll kind of show in a little bit later. I just want to lay those in. Okay, once I get to this point, I'm going to stop a little bit, breathe, and let my paper kind of soak it in a little bit. At this point, you can let it completely dry if you'd like. You can use a hair dryer to dry it out. It's really warm in my studio because I have to keep the window closed. Otherwise, you guys hear all this noise outside, and I'm like, yeah, sorry about that, and sorry about that. So I usually close my windows during recording so that you guys have the best audio, and I swelter in the heat, so just so you know, I'm suffering for you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch to my very small number 4 flat round brush, and I'm going to make a mixture of very loose, very light concentrate of kind of brownish grayish colors. So here's my palette. I'm actually going to use some of this color that I mixed up for a different painting right here. I'm just going to reconstitute it a little bit. And what I love about these palettes that have the white plastic is you can kind of see what color they will be on the paper. So So if you have a palette that's an actual color, it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to pick up a little bit of this black over here and put this in here. And I'm getting a nice shade that I want. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some trees in the background. And you're just going to keep them really ghostly light because the focus isn't on them. The farther things get away, the more undefined things get. So you're going to, like if you see mountain ranges, the mountains that are closest to you are kind of defined and all, you know, crisp and everything. And as the mountain ranges go farther and farther, they get that, you know, purple haze or things like that. So I'm going to have this really just very light concentrate of brown. I'm just going to sketch in some trees. I'm not really worried about a lot about, you know, branches and individual little twigs and leaves or anything like that. I'm just getting the basic shape. These are just going to be my ghost trees in the background. So you'll see you can barely see them. That's okay. I don't want to see them too much. And you'll see as I'm pulling up, my colors kind of mixing still a little bit with that green. It's reconstituting my green. That's okay too. You just want to take your time, be slow, and if you're not used to painting trees, get a separate sheet of paper and just practice painting out your trees on there. I have several videos on how to draw trees, and I think I even have one on where I painted a tree. So you can check those out in my video archives. And I'm just going to put just some random branches. These are just going to show through in the background there. A lot of these are just going to get covered up with bigger trees, but it's okay. And so if you make one and you're like, I didn't like that, just remember you can cover it up with another tree later. No mistakes, it's just fun creating your little forest. Okay, so once you have a couple little ghost trees in here, then you can start beginning to add in some ghost foliage. So I'm going to take a really light bit of green and I'm going to put it over here. And I'm going to mix it with a little bit of yellow. Now it's really white, you can't see it. My lighting is set up differently there. There we go. There we go. So I'm going to just kind of mix that in there with that and just find that, maybe a little bit more brown to that. Just find that shade that I want. Your shade can be totally what you want, but you want it to be light. You don't want it to be a thick color. And I'm just going to take it and I'm just going to start tapping in with this brush some of my background foliage. And if it's too light, you can add a little bit more color to it. I'm keeping it all low to the ground. And you can change up the colors. Add a little bit more red to it. Just play around because nothing's all the same color. You know, different bushes are different shades. Just keep some good water in there so it's flowing nice. And you'll see that the paint isn't spreading this time. It's because your paper should be pretty dry. It should be just sticking right to where you want it to go. I'm just going to tap this in here. You don't want to totally make it all one color. You want to, you know, get that layering in there. I'm going to add a little bit of a darker green in there and just tap over top of that. So I'm building this up. It's not all the same shade. I'm getting some shadows in there, getting some highlights. So each tap I'm pulling up just a little different concentrative color. Just mixing those colors up so they're a nice shade that I want, but they're all a little bit different. And again, I'm moving my brush around so I'm getting, you know, different angles with it so it's not looking like it's a stamp copy. And as I get off to the edges, I'm going to start pushing in some darker color because I want the light to be focused in the center, and as it moves out, it's going to get darker and darker as it goes. So now you'll see that I'm pulling in some of my darkest greens, but still very watered down. And I'm painting right up over top of that tape. It's okay because it's going to seal. It's going to give me that crisp line, but I don't want to take it and not go over that tape. I'm going to put a little bit of brown in here just for some contrast, kind of some brown down in here, and just having some of that sappy brown in there is just going to help just bring that up into the foliage a little bit. So I'm just creating some bushes that might just have that color. Maybe put one right over here. Okay, so now that I got this part, I like this background layer. I'm going to rinse my brush out, dry it off, and I'm going to switch back to my larger flat round. And I'm going to mix up a mixture of some really light brown. I'm going to take some of this dark brown here, and get it all loosened up there, and I'm going to pull it right here into my middle palette. So right now it's has a lot of water to it, and I want to darken it in just a little bit. So I'm actually going to pull some of these sappy green over here. And I'll find I use a lot of my colors that have out here, but if you need to, just pull in a little bit of green in there, a little bit of, just a little bit of a dark blue, until you get the color that you like. I like this color. So I'm just going to start, I'm going to go down lower than I want to have the ground. I'm going to start laying this color in. I'm going to use horizontal strokes so that my brush is working with me to create texture. Because if I go like this, it won't create that texture. I'm going to lay that color in there, again using lots of water. I want this to be wet. And then I'm going to fade this up. So I'm going to clean my brush off just with some water, and I'm going to leave it really wet, and I'm going to create a gradient going up. So you'll see it just took that harsh line away and is letting it kind of fade up there. Now while this is still wet, now I'm going to go back to that color, and I'm going to darken that in a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of a dark, almost a black brown, and I'm going to put in a little bit of this blue in here, add some shading into it so it gets a much darker concentrate. I'm going to start bringing that in here, and you'll see because the paper is still wet, it's going to start to fade out just a little bit. I'm just going to tap that in, but I want, again, keep this area light because everything going towards the center of my painting is nice and light. Where it wants to fade, and again, if I'm doing a stroke, it's going to be a horizontal stroke, but I'm not smoothing this. I want this to kind of have that rough ground look. And if it gets too harsh, like I have a pretty harsh line there, you have to decide if you want to fade that out. Just clean your brush off and then just smooth it over there. It'll fade that line out. I kind of like that. Kind of gives a nice contrast in there. I'm going to keep it for now. I can go back later and soften it up a little bit even after the paint dries. I can kind of wet it up and reconstitute it a little bit and smooth it out. But you're just going to keep playing with this until you get a nice ground that you like. And again, a lot of this is going to be covered up, so don't worry. I still like to have a lot of fun because you never know what little tiny section's going to poke through and you're going to go, oh, that's cute. If you want to put a little bit of grass in there, you can just dab in a little bit of green. And it'll kind of make it look like some grass is growing in there a little bit. And you'll see I'm using my brush flat pointed up and tapping it because it kind of gives that little clustered clumps of grass look to it. And you also notice that when this dries, it changes a little bit. So you'll kind of see how things will spread and fluff out a little bit. And the colors will lighten a lot when you dry. It'll seem a little bit darker now, but once everything completely dries, it'll be a lot lighter. All right, so at this point, you're just going to play around until you have the background area the way you want it, and then we can move on to the foreground or kind of our darker shades. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this video here, and we'll take up part 2 in the next video on Watercolor 101, because I don't want to like time lapse anything. I really want you to see this kind of in the length it takes a person to paint this with as little time lapse as possible. That way you can kind of see all the steps. So it's going to definitely have to be at least 2 videos to do that. So make sure to click the link to the next video, which will be posted if this is the week that you see this being posted, it's posted the next week. But yeah, practice this out. When you get to this point, you can just let your painting dry. And then once it's dry, click on to the next video and then we will continue painting. So thanks for joining me, and until next time, God bless you guys, and we'll see you later. Bye-bye.